I'll just remind members and anyone in the public gallery, if you can switch off your mobile phones, as all committee meetings are held in open session, and I suppose particularly as we're looking at the legislation, we want to record everything today, and I'll also remind members of their obligation. I do say this very much the spirit of buses today, on the basis of nobody on those three comes at once in that regard in terms of members. Remind members to declare obligation to declare any other relevant financial interests. Apologies, I don't think we're aware of any at this stage. I appreciate there may be some.
One for Ross.
One for Ross, okay. I appreciate, I think there's
Chris
some
Hazard.
Chris Hazard, yeah. I don't know whether there might be any further delays, because I think there were some traffic incidents this morning, that sort of things. Okay, we'll move on to Chairperson's business. I suppose a couple of items just I want to raise. First of all, we've seen which there's a little bit of additional information this morning, but obviously there's reports on a national basis within made specific reference to the situation in Northern Ireland on sexual assaults in schools over the last 3 years. And there's obviously been fairly worrying press reports over the numbers that have been involved with that. I don't know if anybody wants to make a comment, but I would also suggest if we write to the department, because there's been a little bit of lack of clarity, I think, around some of the Northern Ireland data. That may not necessarily be from the department, but we need to seek clarity around that, and also seek from the department what guidance they're giving to schools.
No,
sorry, I thought you were.
No, I'm happy enough with that, Chair. I'm concerned about that.
I'll bring in the Vice Chair, Sandra.
Thanks, Chair, for that. No, I noticed that the guidance that the department had responded to whenever this news went out, it made no reference to it's all reactive stuff, in regard of sexual assaults in schools, rather than guidance on how schools can be more proactive. Obviously, there is guidance somewhere, but so I think that's an issue, and the internet is a big issue. So it would be good to see what specifics there are in regard to guidance on that.
I think that'd be useful. I mean, particularly, I suppose specifically if we're looking at the school side of it, to see what guidance there is in terms of the internet stuff at schools itself.
Absolutely.
Obviously, the limited amount that can be done
that's
outside the classroom. I appreciate again, and you're right in terms of, I think, it's very useful to have a lot of stuff that will say what you do once certain circumstances have happened. But I suppose the issue is, to what extent can measures be put in place which can actually either prevent or at least deter this sort of incidents?
Yeah, Chair, it might be also useful in the same vein to get an update in relation to the child sexual exploitation recommendations that were made from the Calhoun Marshall report from the department as they progress there.
Chair, we actually, the department wrote to us. I think we considered it among the pile of correspondence that we got last week.
Okay.
So they've indicated the actions that they've taken.
Okay.
So what I can do is send that to members again, and
Yeah.
if they want to bring that and say that matters arising next week, we might do that.
Okay.
I think there's something missing.
Okay, thank you.
I presume members are happy with all those courses of action, like an important issue. We also had last week, and the Vice Chair then chaired that meeting, a meeting with the informal meeting with the Association of Educational Psychologists. Maybe if the Deputy Chair wants to comment
just
on that.
Back to my notes on that. The meeting was interesting, I think, and it didn't just focus solely on the SEND report. So, we had a wide-ranging conversation with them as well. And I think, one of the issues that they seemed to emphasise was they wanted to be more in contact with the department as a consultee in regard to special education needs, anything to do with their issue. Sorry. Let me see what else I said. I mean, Trevor and Sean came in, and Maeve were also in attendance. They primarily talked about having a good relationship in England and Wales and being able to have that similar relationship here in Northern Ireland. So that's the job they have in work. They gave us their paper on the SEND bill, which I'm sure everyone has. I can hardly read my own writing now, that's the problem. They talked about their role as gatekeepers of the statutory process and how they are called upon in that process at stage 3. And they made some focus on the number of educational psychologists in Northern Ireland they said there's, from my notes, others can correct me if I'm wrong, one educational psychologist in every almost 21,000 in England, and in Northern Ireland they've one for every 15,000 here, so it's something we need to...
That's right. I think one of the things we can follow up on that is to seek the information of the department. I mean, what the position is in relation to that, what the numbers are, and whether there's any intention to increase those, and how it does comparatively. Sorry, go ahead, Sandra.
I think that's more or less it. If there's other things in any of the other members want to...
Okay, I don't know,
mention.
anybody? Sean?
I think Sandra's correct. It was just a bit worrying that, you know, there seemed to be a really good working relationship between them and England and Scotland, England, Wales and Scotland, and the relationship wasn't here. But what did alarm me was that, and maybe we get some clarification on this, is that the SEND in England covers 0 to 24, as opposed to 0 to 19 here. And if you think of many of our young people who are special education needs and maybe working at 2 or 3 or 4 years behind their chronological age, you know, why are we only going as far as 19?
I'm sorry, Chair, some clarification on that. This issue was raised, the 0 to 19, 0 to 23 or 0 to 25. It's actually in our clause by clause table, so the department has provided an answer. But we have officials here again later on, so members would be definitely free to ask them again on this subject.
Trevor?
Well, yeah, I thought it was very useful. Hour and a half. The figures, Sandra, the one psychologist for every 20,923 it was in England.
Yeah, I rounded it up. I have that number exactly here too.
And
Yeah,
some
yeah,
like
you're right.
15,000 here. Well, that was, frankly, I mean, that was done on my calculator according to my guess of what the population of England and Wales is.
Oh yes, it was you.
So I
Did you
wouldn't
check it later?
wouldn't sell too much store by it, you know.
Okay.
Well, I suppose that's one of the reasons why one of the things we're doing is to seek just clarity in the comparative figures in that regard, Trevor.
I
The
forgot to
other-
write down Trevor Lunn said.
The other thing I agree with Sean, there is concern about this age at which the assistant stops, but you know, I think they seem to me to be they wanted to be more heavily involved in some aspect, but then had worries about their ability to cope if they were more heavily involved, and that seemed to point towards that there's not quite enough of them here, and yet just on the bald figures there's more here per capita than what there is across the water. So.
Another issue they talked about was the less number of statements that there are in England, and how there seem to be they were able to cope with the needs there.
Yeah, well, that's
Difference
you need
here.
to-
I wonder,
A
is part
different
of that
policy as well, probably.
an issue around certain level of expectation and a certain culture that everybody, it seems to a lot of people are actually driving towards the thing has got to be get a statement type of
Yeah.
thing. I mean, it's difficult to know what the different sort of positions are between here and other jurisdictions in that regard on it. But it was also an issue around pay, I think, or is that pay award?
Oh yes, they did mention. That there is an outstanding pay award to educational psychologists here.
It might be useful if we can check that with the department as well.
Yes,
Okay. Okay, folks.
thank you.
Right, I think that's all I have in terms of Chairman's business. Refer members to the draft minutes, which are page 6 of your pack. And can I ask members agreement that those are an accurate record?
Agreed.
Yep.
Robin?
Can I just check, Chair, on the school uniforms, whether or not a press release did go out? I didn't see it.
Did I
Yes,
emailed
there
it to
was.
members, and I
Sorry?
think I emailed it to members, and I think it was picked up in the Irish News
Did you?
yesterday.
Right, okay. I didn't see it.
I think at one stage there was like one of the major radio programmes potentially was going to pick up on the issue, but there was some concern it might have been a little bit of a Trojan horse for other issues in relation to that. Leave it hanging there on that basis. On that.
Right, okay.
In fact, I didn't see the press release either.
Beg your pardon, members. I'm
Oh, I
pretty
did.
sure I'd emailed it to members.
I
think it
know
also
definitely it
came
was emailed to Sandra myself, but I
Yeah,
just
no,
wanted to just
I
maybe
think
check
it
the final bit.
I received it as well. Oh,
out.
well, that's all right.
I'll just check my
read
inbox
that
if
one.
I sent it.
Okay.
It must have
This is a check to see who's done their homework in that regard.
I didn't do mine then.
go and stand in the
Okay.
corner.
In terms of, I mean, I don't know if does anybody else have any other matters arising? I mean, obviously today's stuff will very much concentrate on the one issue. Okay, we'll move on then to item 5 on the agenda. Was our first bit in terms of the committee stage on the SEND bill. There's a note at page. Well, actually, I have in my pack page 16, but according to 17 on that. 16 thing. There's a, well, I suppose it's page 16 it starts at. The cover note is actually from page 17 onwards. And there's also then an assembly research paper Caroline's prepared at page 18. So we'll ask Caroline, welcome you first of all to the committee and thank you for your briefing paper. And perhaps if you can take us through that in about 10 to 15 minutes and then we'll open it up to any questions that members have. Okay, Caroline.
Thank you, Chair. So if you're content, I'll give a short overview of the Special Educational Needs and Disability Bill and some of the potential issues, and then I'll quickly discuss the findings from that latest paper on funding.
Okay.
So first of all, by way of background, there has been a steady increase in the number of children and young people with special educational needs, or SEN, over the past 10 years, rising to 22% in 2014-15. And the SEN Bill aims to make a number of changes to support a revised framework for SEN and inclusion, including requiring the Education Authority to request help from a health and social care trust where it could support in the discharge of its functions, although there is no corresponding duty on the trust to cooperate. Providing an independent mediation service that parents will have to consult before they can appeal to the tribunal, and giving children with SEN over the compulsory school age rights that were previously held by their parents, including the right to appeal. The bill also gives the department powers to bring forward quite extensive subordinate legislation, and that will cover areas including that mediation service, including advocacy and other support services, a pilot scheme to enable children to appeal to the tribunal, those who are under the compulsory school age, how the capacity of children to appeal will be determined, and also the assistance and support that will be provided in that regard. The department will also develop the new code of practice, and it will revise existing regulations, including those governing statements and reducing the statutory timescales for statements from 26 to 20 weeks. So a lot of the key detail is really still to come. So I'll now move on to the most recent paper on funding transitions and so on. So looking firstly at the duties of the health bodies in relation to special educational needs, these include duties to inform parents and the Education Authority if they believe that a child has special educational needs, and also to inform parents of any relevant voluntary organisation. They have to assist the Education Authority in the provision of services for children with special educational needs and support transition plans for those with a statement. And they are also required to comply with the Education Authority requests for help within 6 weeks, although there are a number of exceptions to that, including resource constraints. So looking at how that's working in practice, in 2013-14, 59% of statements were issued outside of the statutory time frame of 26 weeks. And of these, just under 3/4 were late due to delayed provision of advice from the trusts. So I asked the Department of Health for details of how many of their requests they're meeting and within the timescales, but they actually don't collate that information or analyse it or the reasons for those decisions. I also asked about the code of practice requirement for each trust to designate an officer as a point of reference for special educational needs, and it's also their duty to coordinate advice from professionals, and there is quite a lot of variation. There is no designated officer at the Belfast Trust, while the Northern Trust has other designated officers. So looking now at transitions, research in Northern Ireland shows that the process does work well for most people, but that there are serious concerns for a small minority of young people with quite complex disabilities at post-19. And it also points to geographical variation in provision, and that was found to be compounded by inadequate joint working between education and health. With regard to funding for special educational needs, as members will be aware, it's not ring-fenced here, and there is variation in practice internationally. Many countries, it's the same, there is no ring-fencing. In England, it's generally not ring-fenced, but for pupils who have an education and health care plan, which is similar to a statement, they may avail of a personal budget, which aims to give them sort of greater choice and control over their spend. And there is a similar system in the Netherlands that's called backpack funding, although the Netherlands are actually moving away from that because they found that it led to quite an increase in referrals. In terms of Irish medium education, the research suggests that assessment tests and resources and so on are limited in Irish, and it also identifies that there is a need to build capacity within the sector. So just to summarise, the SEND Bill makes a number of changes to the SEND framework, although a lot of it is yet to come in the regulations and the code of practice. The evidence does point to issues around joint working between education and health in regard to special educational needs assessment provision, also in relation to transitions, and there is a lack of data analysis in that regard. Also, the variation in the designation of an officer for special educational needs across trusts is another area that might be given consideration. And the evidence also suggests that there are challenges for Irish medium schools in relation to special educational needs. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Robin, I think you're first in.
Yes, Chair, thank Caroline. Can I just ask, in terms of the training for the Board of Governors, what's the extent of that training?
The Department advised that there has been training on special educational needs previously, because the Boards of Governors have been recently reconstituted. The current training is mostly focusing on induction, and they advised me that there is a general reference to special educational needs. So I'm not sure the extent of that. There was research done, I think it was in 2010, and a lot of governors were saying that they would like more training on special educational needs and also on their legal duties in general. So the department has said that it is working on, building that capacity and that training for governors. Of course, that training is not mandatory as well. So.
Maybe just a question to the department, Chair, as to what their intentions are in terms of a training package for those Boards of Governors.
Obviously, we'll have the department in front of us a little bit later on.
Yeah.
Okay, Robin, if you're finished. Sean, I think was next.
Thanks, Caroline, again for very useful presentation. And it just really concerns me here. Our Department of Health is under a lot of pressure. We hear this morning again about waiting lists and whatever else. But it really doesn't. Put in a nutshell, it doesn't seem that special education needs is a priority within the Department of Health. If you look at some of the figures that Caroline has there, that 75% of the statements that hasn't happened within the 26 weeks because of information coming back from the Department of Health. Even within the Department of Health, they don't seem to have success criteria. They couldn't produce figures for how many are meeting the target and so on. So, and I see Caroline sitting, the other Caroline here sitting in the background as well, and it really does frustrate me here that no matter what the Department of Education does on this, is that the breakdown is in the Department of Health in terms of priorities of special education needs. And, it's something that's there with the SEND bill as it is at the minute. How are we going to deal with our new SEND bill? How can we build something in so that this just can't
I
continue?
suppose related to that, Sean, with the lack of collation of information, if there's clearly, at least on the face of it, clearly a problem in terms of, particularly on the timeline side of it, it then becomes very difficult to analyse as to what the root of the cause of the problem of that is if you don't have the information. Because, for instance, is that purely failing to process from the health side of it? Is it, one sense, you kind of wonder a little bit that if you've got a situation where 3/4 of the cases are beyond what the target time is, I suppose one of the other questions is the target time a realistic target time as well? Is enough being given to that? The problem is it's very difficult then to make any degree of analysis to say how do you start sorting out the problem if the correlation of the information, or the collation of the information, particularly as regards, breakdown as why particular things have happened. If the question why doesn't really appear to be being asked or certainly monitored on that regard, it's very difficult then to drill down, to what the solutions are then in that regard. Because, it makes it more difficult.
I agree with you, Chair, because 26 weeks is half a year. And a 4 or 5-year-old child with special education needs, half year is a long time in terms of their development. Yeah. It could be it could be a year, it could be 2 years in terms of development. So it's just a major concern. And then added to that, the other major concern is that Irish medium education, special education needs, doesn't seem to be being addressed properly in that as well, because we haven't got people, whether in the boards or whatever, have sufficient knowledge of Irish.
Well, I suppose directly one of the opportunities, Probably those will be more, I mean, both those will be more questions we can put to the director
Yeah,
to the
probably
department.
are, yeah.
As well, and Caroline, but Jonathan? Oh, we weren't, sorry. Trevor?
Yeah, I'm like Sean, I think I may have the wrong Caroline here, but it's in your paper, Caroline, present. The special units factor, this is for schools which have special education units, and allocated a lump sum for each class within the unit of £3,000 per class. That does seem like a piddling amount of money, frankly. I mean, and also I noticed going on from that they then attract a reduced age, or is it age-weighted pupil unit amount to reflect the fact that the Education Authority is paying for staffing costs within the unit. So is this giving a small amount of money and taking it away again? Is that?
I suppose they would say that they're covering the staffing costs, so the teaching and classroom assistants, they're covering those, so that's an additional amount that would be covered. But again, each pupil then is attracting slightly less in reflection of that than pupils that aren't in the unit.
It doesn't. I'll keep my powder dry for a while, but it doesn't seem like much by way of support. But beyond that.
Maeve?
Yeah, thanks, Caroline. Just going back to the would you refer to the inaccuracy of the joint working effectively between education and health? First of all, it was 75% of statements that were outside the 26 weeks, or was it 59? I wasn't sure, just.
Oh, so 59% of all statements are outside of the time frame, and I think it's 74% of those are due to late receipt of advice from the Health Trust.
Okay, and they're just so that I'm clear as well, there's an issue about that information hasn't been collated
Yeah,
in terms of what that delay was about.
that's right. So I asked the Department of Health if they could give me information how many requests they're complying with, how many they're complying with within the 6-week period, and the reasons for, because there are a number of exceptions, valid exceptions for those, including if a child misses an appointment and so on, or if they don't have the resources, but that information is just not being collated.
Okay, and then in terms of the actual sort of sense of the inadequacy and how it practically works out, you talked about the transitions and the issues faced then by students with complex disabilities transferring to post-19. Is that two separate categories that you're seeing that?
So sorry, in terms of the...
In terms of how, I suppose, in a nutshell, how it's not working, how the joint working is not working,
Right.
is transitions a specific area on its own, and is complex disabilities post-19
Yeah.
an area on its own?
It is the Department of Health that has responsibility for those young people at post-19, and there are issues around, for example, placement, availability of placements, maybe being placed with older people in sort of residential or daycare, those kinds of issues. But the research does point to issues around ineffective or inadequate joint working between education and health during the transitions process
Okay.
as well. Geographical variation too.
So it's more, sorry, Chair, just to drill down a bit on so it's more about that transitions period?
There is an issue about the provision that is there from the Department of Health, but the research does point to issues with the transitions process too.
And then just in terms of other, I know you looked at other models of funding, other international best practice or examples. Has the same been done just in relation to cooperation between education and health elsewhere?
Yeah, not specifically, but it did. I mean, just during my reading, for example, in England, there was legislation just last year that requires joint commissioning now for special educational needs, and it's also in the Code of Practice. So they'll have joint commissioning of services, and there is certainly a drive. They are identifying issues with that, different governance structures, different ways of working, different terms and conditions. There are challenges there, and it is requiring a lot of input from all of the partners, but the legislation is there in England now to do that. Scotland as well is another jurisdiction that has tried to work towards that, and again, the challenges are there in the literature, it's not easy. The OECD actually just produced a book there, I only got it yesterday, and it talks about this internationally. There are some quite innovative models internationally, it said, but the challenges are there. Where it's done well, the outcomes are good, service delivery is improved, and so on.
Okay, thank you, Caroline. Thank you, Chair.
Anybody else? in relation to that? Okay. Caroline, oh, sorry, Sean.
Sorry, I can't find it, Caroline. It talks about the funding in, I think, Finland and other countries. They get over and above whatever the 2 or 3 times the funding, and the funding follows the child. In terms of, have you done any comparison of the funding
I think
for
it's page
children in
21,
Northern
I
Ireland
think.
and children in Finland just normal?
Sorry, what was the last bit there?
For example, it says somewhere in that about in Finland, I think they get children with special education needs get more 2 or 3 times the funding. In terms of the base unit of funding per child, is there, have you done any comparison there, what a child in Finland gets as opposed to a child in Northern Ireland?
No, I haven't sort of looked at those figures directly. I didn't come across a direct comparison, but something I could go away and see if I could drill down into a bit more.
Yeah.
You mean the amount per pupil, essentially?
Yeah, the
Right.
amount per pupil, because maybe children here get better funding as a starting point. I'm not sure. And then, in terms of how do they determine that this child have the statement process similar to what we have here, or is it more rigid, or what?
There is a process in Finland, and I'm just trying to
I couldn't find it.
to remember exactly.
I've been reading it, but
Yeah, I would need to go back and just clarify that to see what their process is exactly. Yeah, I'd rather do that than just
yeah, that's okay.
try and guess an answer. So
That's okay.
come
Thanks
back to
very
you with
much.
that one.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's nothing else, Caroline, thank you very much for your paper. So, folks, right, the next section will be the procedural advice, which is the normal process is that this is held in private session. So just first of all seek agreement of the committee that we move to the private session. Members are agreed?
Yep. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate.
Back then into public session. Yes, so warn members in terms of any comments they wish to make. We're now in public session. Right, correspondence to refer to members at pages 159 to 217, and there are 3 items provided under correspondence. I think from the point of view of the items of correspondence, there's a suggested sort of, on page 158 in terms of how we deal with those who really to note the various items, unless anybody wants to raise anything particularly as regards any of those areas. Okay, so members happy to note. Right, forward work programme. I should also say as well, because I suppose one item which maybe came a wee bit out of previous correspondence. Just remind members, obviously, because I think a number of us have indicated that we're going along that tomorrow afternoon's the Make Your Mark event. I think maybe we'd previously, I think, taken a sort of a poll of members, or at least an indication of it, and I think there'll be a number of members there, but just to...
Is that the Youth Parliament table?
Yes, it's Youth Parliament table. It's I think, it's
2 p.m.
2 p.m. is the formal session. There is, I think, an opportunity for a little bit of lunch and sort of informal, I suppose, meeting of members that will be there at 1:30. I think there was indications given that they're expecting about 85, I think, from different. There's sort of, I know Paul has the circular there that they're anticipating, I think. Sorry, anticipate over 120 young people at the event. There's 34 schools have pre-registered, so you get schools from across Northern Ireland will be there, and that's it. Okay. Right. Sorry, that was just a set as an aside. Just in terms of the forward work programme, there's a revised version of the draft work programme which has been tabled, physically tabled. Just to advise members that the papers for the briefing from the department on the 23rd of September, the draft regulations of the SEN bill, they won't be available in advance, but will be tabled on the day. Also advise members that the briefings and changes to school inspection and special schools area planning have now been scheduled.
Sorry, Chair.
Or the
There's a little drafting error there. The changes to school inspection briefings. This is the changes on the descriptors and
Yes.
formal intervention. That's 30th September. I'm still talking to the department about special schools area planning. Encourage them to come soon, very soon.
Okay.
Sorry, beg your pardon.
That's okay. Briefings on PFG and teacher education strategy have been moved to the 7th and the 14th of October, respectively. There's also advised members that the Assembly has secured support under Erasmus Plus to establish a youth panel. The panel has agreed to undertake some work on mental health issues, including mental health in schools, to bring the members' attention. And I'd also seek the committee's agreement to have formal oral briefing from the panel in January 2016 and its findings. This will, don't even get your chalk ices at this point, says this will include a short film. So you may take it that one thing, but members content then to have the formal oral briefing in January? Okay. And in line with a previous agreement to meet informally with business and the community, a meeting has been scheduled for 1 p.m. on Tuesday the 29th of September. And are members content to attend on that date? That would obviously be during, effectively, the that would be obviously during the break. So we'd only just issue slightly, I suppose we can, might be a minute or two later, that because 1 o'clock now, the business committee's meeting at 1.
We'll stall them.
But
till
normally
15.
those we're in now in about 15 minutes, because that would affect both the chair and vice chair.
Okay, no, I will
regard.
make that a little bit later then.
Okay.
What was that meeting about, Chair?
What's that?
What was that meeting about?
Business in the community. Maybe in the clerk. Maybe just.
Basically, it's a business community or have undertaken a number of education projects, and they're very keen to talk to the committee about them. I think they approached the deputy chair, so they it's an informal meeting.
I think because I think Deputy Chair raised it, was it last week or the week before, so wheels have been set in motion in relation to that. Okay. Members, just formally seek your endorsement of the forward work programme.
Yeah,
Okay, agreed. Any other business anybody has? Sean?
Just one wee thing, maybe I mentioned this yesterday, but maybe we could write to the department in terms of the Delivering Social Change Shared Education Programme. There's a number of schools have had their letter of offer withdrawn because they didn't satisfy that they're, in terms of their Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3 assessment or somewhere up to scratch. You know the way there's been issues with unions in
Okay.
that area anyhow. So
Sure, everybody would be happy to.
just to clarify the situation for us.
I'm just trying to remember from last week, did we talk about the voluntary exit scheme and skills last week? Are we requesting information on that?
Yes, we
Or-
have written to the department. The department's going to come to us now on the 7th of October, but if we want more...
Well, it's just,
Yeah.
maybe I missed, I can't remember if it was last week, but obviously the department paid for, or they said they were
Yeah.
sorting that out. It would be interesting to know where they find the money for it, or what, did I ask that last week?
No.
Got a bit of a deja vu here, but,
No, I think we're looking at some information, but I don't think we'd probed on
but yeah, it's
where the
just,
money was coming from.
it would be interesting to
Yeah.
see where that money came from. or what-
I suppose the other one, I suppose related to that, I don't know whether, and again, depending on wider events on it, if there's been indications given by the government centrally that voluntary exit will be given a green light, do you have a situation where maybe departments or arm's length bodies that have essentially bitten the bullet and jumped ahead of that, I mean, do they then get effectively reimbursed out of a central
Yeah.
pot, or whether that comes, I mean, suppose maybe that,
But if we find out from the department,
Yeah.
do you know, was the money taken from something else, or was it from a wee secret stash that maybe the minister
Yes.
has? You know,
Maybe for contingency fund, just as members know, certainly
Yes.
from
Yes.
the teachers, they, because they were being let go as a result of amalgamation or closures, 14-15 was coming out of the department's own budget. So rather than from the central fund, whereas the arm's length bodies would be different, right? But where did they get that money from?
yeah,
perhaps we'll give them one of those forms with the 2 boxes to tick with, you know, did this money A come from, tick box if it is from a pre-allocated resource from elsewhere, box 1, and then think, we secret stash of cash, box 2. Okay. If
thank you.
members don't have any other business, then the next scheduled meeting of the committee will be the 16th of September. It was next Wednesday at 10 a.m. in the Senate chamber. Put the question that the committee is now adjourned.
Thank you, Chair.
Please adjourn.